I want to take a moment to recognize the tragedy that's been going on in California. It's truly been devastating to see how many people have lost their homes and are now left with grief, fear, and hopelessness. I will be offering pro bono somatic experiencing services to first responders and anyone else who has been directly impacted by the fires. If you know someone who has been affected and is in need of trauma services, please share this with them. Those interested can contact me at tatiana.szulc.lmhc@gmail.com. Welcome to She is Resilient, a podcast for women on their healing journeys who are ready to start living their most authentic and empowered lives outside of survival mode. I'm your host, Tatiana, trauma and somatic therapist, as well as a holistic coach, and I'm on a mission to help more women heal their nervous systems. Each week, me and my guests are going to get real and vulnerable about the experiences that led us to becoming the empowered and resilient women we are today. You'll leave this podcast with the skills, knowledge, and inspiration to start creating the life you deserve. Because if another woman can do it, so can you. Welcome back to another episode of She is Resilient. Today we have Jeanette on the podcast. Jeanette, tell us who you are and what you do for a living.
Hello, my name is Jeanette Yates, and I am a wife, a mom of two adult, as they want me to tell them, say, boys, and I have a wonderful little puppy. And I also am my mom's caregiver. I have been since I was 8 years old. And I run a business called the Self-Caregiver, where I help caregivers who are experiencing burnout and maybe even frustration or feeling trapped in their caregiving role learn how to handle that, move through that so that they can feel untrapped in their life, and so they can live life beyond their caregiving. So that's what I do on a regular basis, just a little bit of all those things.
I love that. I love that. And usually we kind of get into this field because we have some kind of experience ourselves, and just kind of like walk us through that journey with us.
Well, I will go through the whole story, so sit back because it's going to be a while because I've been doing it since I was 8. But I would like to say, to your point, that I do think, whenever we go through something, and like I felt so alone as someone who was struggling with burnout. I wasn't ever able to recover from the exhaustion I was experiencing as my mom's caregiver. And I also felt pretty guilty about it. I would get frustrated with my mom and be like, what kind of person gets frustrated with their mom, all this kind of stuff. And when I went through my healing journey as an adult, I did have to go all the way back to the beginning when she first got sick. And so I learned so much that I was like, I can't be the only person that is feeling like I'm feeling. I can't be the only person who is tired of caregiving, but also doesn't want to give up on their parents.
Yeah.
Or I can't be the only person that is, wanting to care for their parent without carrying all of the dysfunction of the family, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
So that's why I started doing what I was doing, because I was like, I just want other people to know they're not alone. And if I can help them on their own journey, that's great. So that's where the business came from.
Mhm.
But my my healing journey, and in some senses, I believe that I've been healing gradually, slowly throughout the years. I just think for me, especially the way my mind works, um, I'm always seeking for more healing. Not that I always feel broken, but just how can I expand more into
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
universe?
Yeah.
Um, at least that's the way I feel now. I can, I spent much of my life hiding for a long time, but
Mhm.
so every experience I've had in therapy or something like that, I've really learned a lot about whatever I was doing at the time, and then moved on to something else. So, but my story of healing that I'm in now, this journey that I'm and now this awakening. Me and my fellow menopausal friends are like, we're not in a crisis. This is an awakening. We're feeling awesome, you
Yeah, I
know?
love that.
Yeah. So if you're young and you're worried about it, don't worry. It gets great. Um, just go get all that stuff from the doctors. So I've been caring for my mom since she was diagnosed with her disease when I was 8 years old. Now, I remember sitting at the kitchen table counting out because in 1984 there weren't 100 milligram pills, there were 10 milligram pills. So if she was taking 100 milligrams, we had to count out all the pills. Now it's not as hard, but back then I would count out her pills for her, with her, she's not. And I was the person that would get her a drink, and I was the person that would help her to the bathroom, and all of this kind of stuff. And it was like I was just mommy's little helper. Like that was just it wasn't caregiving. I was just doing my part.
Right.
And so I thought that's what a good daughter did, whatever mommy needed her to do. Because if mommy didn't get what she needed, she was going to die, is what
Yeah.
my brain understood at the time.
Right.
And then flash forward, 40 years later, 38 years later, and my mom now is very debilitated. She's not walking. She's not moving that much. She's also insisting on not moving into a nursing home. So she's on her own. And she has some home care, but when, they don't stay 24/7. So as soon as they leave, there's a problem. I'm going over. I'm going over. I'm going over. And I was just, getting to the point where my life was all again. So it had been when I was younger. And then I had periods where, I went to college,
Mm-hmm.
I got married,
Mm-hmm.
but there was always the sense of when your mom needs you more, you're going to step in. That's,
Mm-hmm.
and so like, and of course I had a period of like 4 years,
Yeah.
not 24 years
Yeah.
of my mom being, you know, so I was going to the appointments. I was meeting her at the appointments, and I'm taking her to the appointments. Then I'm doing the appointments online because she can't go. And then,
What
and
was
like all,
that like for you? In those moments, was it just something that you wasn't kind of ingrained in you already? Was like, okay, this is just what I do, or did it feel exhausting, or did it feel like a burden at that time?
and this happened to me, in the way it happened to me, but I think it also happens to a lot of people. When you start caring, especially for your parents, it's different if it's your spouse or child, obviously, but like when you start caring for that, you don't realize that's what you're doing.
Mm.
You're like, of course, I'm going to the doctor with my mom, dude, big whoop. Like, I wish my friend would come to the doctor with me. Like, I don't know, like, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But then you realize, oh, I'm not here just as a buddy. I'm here because I need to be paying attention.
Mm. Hmm.
And I need to be communicating with the doctor just as much as my mom is communicating with the doctor.
Hmm.
And so I think it sneaks up on you. And so at the time, I just am like, yep, I'm the daughter, I'm the caregiver, this is what I do. And like you kind of indicated, this was something that was ingrained in me since I was a little girl. I was told, my mom got married to my stepfather. A month later, she was in the hospital being diagnosed with her disease. I
Mm.
went to live with some relatives while I was there, while my mom was in the hospital being diagnosed and treated. I was abused.
Mm.
Um, and so I had all of that trauma of change, of in a new situation, my mom is sick, and then I'm told, she's sick, everything is going to be different.
Yeah.
And we all have to do everything that we can to make sure that she has what she needs. Oh, and by the way, anything that stresses her out could make her worse,
Mm.
and that could make her disease worse, and she could die.
Wow, that's a lot for an
So
8-year-old.
yeah, so that's what I heard as an 8-year-old. I'm sure if you sat my older relatives down and say, "Did you say all this?" They'd be like, we didn't mean it like that," or like I don't know, but like I do remember being told, stress makes your mommy worse.
Yeah.
And so when, you have something that you feel like is a bad thing happening to you, but you don't want to stress out your parent,
Mm-hmm.
because, you might get in trouble, they might die, you might get in trouble because they die. Like,
Right.
it
Yeah.
was just, it was a lot. And so I carried that with me. And so over the course of my life, and this actually manifested in many different ways, I just tried to be super convenient and super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, I don't want to be a problem. So super people pleaser. So
Yep.
people pleaser to the max.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and or the crybaby. Those were my two go-tos. I'm either trying to be trying to do whatever you want me to do to be your friend, or I'm bawling in the corner because the stress is just too much.
Yeah.
Um, at the time, I didn't know that's why I was crying. I just thought I was a crybaby. I just thought, back in when I was growing up, you were a wuss. If you're
Mm-hmm.
like, now people are it's a little bit different, but back then it was just like not acceptable.
Yeah.
Um, and so when we get to 5 years ago now, my mom has continued to decline. She has been consistently told by medical professionals it's time to move into assisted living. She is adamant that if she ever goes into assisted living, if she ever has to go into a nursing home, she's done. She's dead. She's a dead person.
Wow.
It's akin to, signing her death warrant. Like that'll be her death warrant if she ever has to go. So there was this whole idea of like, do whatever it takes to make sure she doesn't have to go.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, because for years it was like when she gets too bad to be on her own, she can come live with us. But at some point, while she was still on her own, she became so debilitated that like I could not care for her in my home. Like my home isn't safe for her. um I can't physically do the things that she needs to be done. So all that. There was all this stuff that was like, oh, we thought it was going to work this way, but that's just not going to work. And so
Mm-hmm.
we knew that when the time came where, uh, and she would always say, well, when the time comes when I can't do it, you'll just fill in the cracks and we'll do the best we can.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no ability to say, no, I can't do that,
Mm-hmm.
other than to say, I know you can't come live with me because it's not going to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
But then she was like, well, okay, then you'll have to do whatever it takes to keep me here.
Mm-hmm.
And that just became more and more. It was like when I try to describe to people what it was like, um, we were able to get some, the insurance to pay for some care in the home. But there would be a period of time, like 12 hours where, actually more than that, 15 hours a day where she would be alone. So I would go over in the evenings and everything would have to be set up next to her chair in the living room and next to her bed on the bedside so that she could stand and pivot to get in her chair and then stand and pivot to get into her bed,
Mm-hmm.
and then be able to reach the remote to adjust her bed,
Mm-hmm.
reach the light to turn it off, reach her beverage to take her medicine, get to her medicine,
Yeah.
all of these things. And if anything, if the remote fell off the bed, if the if the string broke off the fan, the light, if her medicine fell on the floor, if anything
Mm-hmm.
was wrong, it would be a major problem. I'd have to go back over there in the middle of the night, all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
So it was like building like a Jenga.
Yeah.
Everything was a house of cards, just like everything had to be just right. And if anything went wrong,
Yeah.
she could fall on the floor, she could hit her head, she
Yeah.
could, miss her medicine, which would be, terrible, blah, 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 just all this whole.
Yeah.
And so she's living in a state of constant fear of that happening.
Yeah.
I'm living in a state of constant fear of that happening. And at the same time, my kids now, they've always known Granny to be sick, but at
Mm-hmm.
the same, now they're in middle school or, just starting high school. They don't have to go with me anymore to see Granny. They don't want, they're staying at home with dad,
Mm-hmm.
and dad and the boys are just living their lives.
Right.
And so I would come home every night after going over there and getting everything set up. And my kids are like doing their thing. My husband's doing, they're either all three of them are off together doing something or they're all three off doing something different. And I was like, I'm missing out on my family.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. And so I began to have this. That's when I began realizing that I had been in burnout
Hmm.
forever.
Yeah.
And I had no way, I had no idea. No, I could not figure out what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I
What
felt like a terrible mom and a terrible daughter at the same time.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
What were those signs that you were noticing either internally, like physically or emotionally, or even externally, behaviorally, that told you you were in a state of burnout? When was that moment that you realized, oh my gosh, I'm living in this state of burnout?
Yeah. So I think that I had just accepted my fatigue as
Mhm.
being just something about who I. So I was, even when I was working a job, I would have to sleep, either in the middle, if I was home, I would take a break in the middle of the day and sleep. If I was working at an office, I would come home and sleep before I did anything else. Um, or just veg out, or just like
Yeah.
completely dissociate
Yep.
from the rest of the world. I was always one thing I can tell you is that my physical body was in so much pain. I've always had tummy issues. Um,
Hmm.
and while I had figured out at some point, oh, I carry my stress in my stomach, I did not fully understand how um how my stressful state of living was basically causing my digestion to just flipping shut down.
Totally. Yeah, it was so
Um,
normal for you that
right,
this was just your everyday. You didn't know that
right,
something deeper was happening.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so I had chronic um stomach problems. I was fatigued all the time. Towards the time where I finally was started to address this,
Mhm.
I would like we would do family functions, my in-law, and I would not go.
Yeah.
Or I would go and go immediately to a back bedroom and go, like I would hang out for 5 minutes and go to sleep.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody would go to the beach house and I would be like, we have 45 minutes to drive to the beach and then I'm going to go straight in and take a nap.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want to participate. I couldn't. Or if I was there, I was just like, oh, now I can, now we're here at the beach. I'm going to sit down in this chair and not move for 3 hours.
Yeah, totally.
Like just
And
not, yeah.
were you in therapy at this point, or when was that moment that you decided to start addressing these symptoms?
Well, so I realized I would say 2017, 2018, I was like, this is starting, I'm starting to get stressed out. My kids weren't quite checked out yet, but there was, I had a lot of stuff going on. I was having some, issues in my marriage that were just like, I didn't have time to address.
Right. Yeah.
And I was
And
like, oh. And so I did go to therapy, but what it was interesting because I went and I said, listen, I was abused as a child. I've been through therapy for that. I've handled that. I had an eating disorder earlier in my life. I've already dealt with that. So now I'm here to figure out how to be a better caregiver for my mom. That's what I need help with.
Mhm.
And my therapist, to her credit, was like, oh, sweetheart, that's not how it works up in here. And so what she was able to do for me, well, and I mean, she met me where I was, and like
Yeah.
we basically talked about, hey, you need some there was this idea of like, you need to set some boundaries. And I was like, I cannot say the N word to my mom. I'm not going to say no to her. And
Mhm.
so that was like just a strategy that I had to learn, like to get the language to say that. And then to your point, which I think you're going to, this is your wheelhouse. It was like, well, I can do that, but then how do I actually stick to it? How does the guilt not, light me up on fire inside, turn
Mhm.
my stomach into, that was where I had to learn to sit with my body
Right. Hey there, if you're looking for daily somatic practices to add to your toolbox, I'd love to introduce you to my somatic bundle where I guide you through over 30 somatic tools and practices that support your nervous system by creating the safety that your nervous system requires to move out of survival mode. Just click the link in the show notes and you will get immediate access to my library of tools. See you there.
So the boundary, like actually, when I was like, okay, I can do this. I'm gonna, that probably took 6 months of her.
Yeah.
But then it was like, I'm gonna do this. And then I found out, I set a boundary with her where it was like, I'm not gonna come over every single time you can't turn off the light. Like you're just gonna have to sleep with the light in your face, like
Yeah.
I need a break, And then I remember one night when, I got a call in the middle of the night, as I did all the time. And it was something like that.
Yeah.
I need a snack. I need, whatever.
Yeah.
So the light's on, something.
Right.
And I had already told her I wasn't doing it. And I was so mad because I got up and I got in my car. I'm like wearing my PJs, my stupid, flip-flops. I'm driving the 3 miles down the road and I'm pissed. And then I just start laughing hysterically because I realize she didn't do anything wrong. She's doing what she's always been doing.
Yeah.
I'm the one that needed to tell her no and go back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the big wake up call for me, that the work I needed to do wasn't about what she should be doing or not doing. Like whether or not, is it forcing her to go to a nursing home or telling her not to call me or blah, 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 like all this kind of stuff. Is like, no, I'm not in charge of her in that way. She's
Right.
just, I feel a need to make a disclaimer. My mom had all of her faculties at the time. She was cognitively, so I wasn't in a position to take control of her decision making.
Right.
So I had to only do what I could do, which is take control of my own decision making, which was half of the problem. But then there was that other half of, well, if you say no, you're not going to come turn off the light, and then you hang up the phone, are you going to be able to go back to sleep?
Mm-hmm.
Because are you going to be able to sit in your own body
Mm-hmm.
and move through the discomfort? And
Yeah.
that's really where addressing, more of a mind-body connection really became pivotal in my healing journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. You bring up such a good point because oftentimes I think that when we set boundaries, we expect the other person to just follow, just respect our boundary and automatically change their behavior. But setting boundaries has nothing to do with the other person and everything to do with how we respond if
Right.
they don't respect our boundary.
Right. Well, and so if you have a statement that is about someone else's behavior, that's a rule.
Right. Exactly.
If the statement is about your own behavior, that's your boundary.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And so for me, and of course, caregiving boundaries are different than some other boundaries. With some people, you build a wall and you don't go back there, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I don't want this person is toxic or whatever word we want to use. And we put a wall and there it is. Well, when you're trying to have a relationship with your loved ones, whether you're caregiving for them or not yet, but you still want to have a relationship with them, you're going to have to build a boundary that looks more like a fence. Where I always, when I talk about boundaries with me and my mom, it's like, I didn't want, what that's a whole different story about how I felt trapped in her own cage. Like her illness and her trauma was a cage and I was trapped in it with her.
Yeah.
And that was a prison for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
What I had to do was learn to create it's a big field. We were talking about before we hit record, like out in the Colorado mountains in the summer. There's big field and there's a picket fence,
Yeah.
and neighbors can come up to it and talk to each other, but then there's also an understanding that's your grass to mow, this is my grass to mow. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like
Totally.
I
Yeah.
got, this is the stuff I'm going to deal with, that's the stuff you need to deal with. We can help each other out, but we
Yeah.
can't take over each other's space.
1000%. I love that. I
And
love
so
that.
like that's what I try to, like we're so afraid of setting boundaries and saying,
Mhm.
we're conditioned as children, I mean, if you have kids, you do this too. It's like, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to go do it. That is a rule.
Exactly.
When we are, and then as children, we were raised, I know in my, the way I was raised, I was a little bit softer on my kids. But it's like, you're going to do what your parents say, like you're
Mhm.
supposed to. That's what obedient children do, right? And so this idea that you're not going to do what your parents say anymore, sometimes as their caregiver, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, totally. And for you, you were experiencing that guilt and you were experiencing those physical symptoms in your
Mhm.
body. And I'm curious to know what were some of the things that you started to do to address those physical symptoms?
So one of the first things, in the course, like the first like year or so I was in therapy, we just did kind of more of a talk therapy situation.
Mhm.
She was just kind of helping me get some skills, like communication skills.
Yeah.
But we needed to address the deeper issues that were going on, which is, you know, the not saying no to my mom was the belief that that was somehow not giving her the care she needed, which in turn would be not, that I could be like that I was responsible for keeping her alive.
Right.
And if I couldn't keep her at home and she had to go to a nursing home, that would be just like killing her. That's what she told me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that took me all the way back to when I was, a child. So one of the things that I started doing in therapy was working with EMDR,
Hmm.
um, with the bilateral stimulation,
Hmm.
and really checking in and doing some of that inner child work.
Yeah. Great.
Now that's one thing, but in my practice, but that's once a week. I still have the rest of the week to deal with everything. So what
Totally.
do you do?
Right.
Yeah, you can't walk around with those, things in your hands. Um, and so I started practicing more breathing
Hmm.
techniques where I was really trying to just focus on my breathing,
Hmm.
and be present in my body. And I also did, I practice this, they say in the mindfulness space, it's like non-judgmental awareness. So whatever the
Hmm.
feeling is, you just are aware of it, but you don't judge it. So if I was feeling guilty, you know, I, I couldn't be like, oh, you got to stop feeling guilty. It was just like, oh, you feel guilty. Of
Hmm.
course you do. This is really hard.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then let it go and then come back to my breath. And then, so just breathing really helped me initially. Like it was just as basic as that. So not a
Mhm.
huge embodiment practice, not a huge one, but very much something that helped me. And then as I started to, so one of the things that happened as I was doing the EMDR work in therapy is I
Mhm.
was starting to notice where in my body I was feeling the things.
Yeah.
So I never knew or heard of or talked about. I'm sure my science teachers from school are probably like, what are you talking about? But like, I never even thought about my solar plexus,
Hmm.
never thought about it. And it has become like one of the guiding things that tells me when I don't, I lack the self-confidence. Like there's something that's going on where I'm not confident in something. I
Yeah.
did not. And so once I learned how to listen to the areas of my body that were giving me signals,
Yeah.
and then I would just put my hands wherever that was.
Mhm.
So typically it was in my solar plexus, sometimes on my lower belly, um, and breathe and just practice
Mhm.
breathing with my hands
I
there.
love that.
That was also very helpful.
I
Which
love that.
reminded me as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about all the different types of ways that I connect with my body and move it in different ways. Um, and one of the things that I did was one of my mom's high school buddies is like a Reiki master
Oh,
and on
cool.
the board of the Reiki Alliance,
Uh-huh.
just randomly. And
Wow.
she came and did a Reiki attunement with my mom and I.
Mm.
Um, and of course, I should be just doing it for me, but I'm also watching my mom do it, because and because she's bedbound now. She is in a nursing home. She's bedbound. But I saw my mom touch her own body
Mhm.
in ways that I had never seen her
Mhm.
touch herself with
Mhm.
such tenderness and care.
Wow.
And it made me even more aware of how I want to be connected to my own body.
Mhm.
Not only like when I'm in my yoga room practicing in the mornings, but also
Mhm.
in the world where others see me, that I'm not afraid to touch my own body or be in it.
Yeah.
Because I thought, gosh, my mom's had this disease since 1984, and I don't ever remember her tenderly care caring for herself. It's always been a
Totally.
fight, 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 this,
1000%.
yeah,
And right, like
yeah,
when you are diagnosed with an illness or a disease, your body isn't a safe place, right?
right,
And how wonderful that your mom could access some pleasant parts of her body or even just
right,
feel that connection between her hand and her
right.
body. Wow. I think that's pretty significant. And I know that you experienced the Reiki session for yourself, but also just witnessing your mom
Yeah.
experience that, I can see how that can be really powerful.
Well, and I wanted to share that because, like neither one of us are we're pretty, my mom, she was a guidance counselor. That's one of the things that she did, and she studied
Mhm.
biofeedback and a lot of stuff like that. So, but Reiki and some of the more energy healing modalities are not something that I was brought up with or she was even really aware of.
Mhm.
And so we were both kind of like at the point, like this was probably a year ago now, like it's like we have literally tried everything else
Mhm.
to ease the discomfort in her body, and why not? So it was like, what the heck?
Yeah.
But we went in with an open mind, and I just remember just feeling so um like how I could see it almost change her whole aura, if you will. I don't even know
Yeah.
if that's the right word, but like I could tell it was healing to her to
Mhm.
touch her own body in a way that wasn't, what's wrong with this? Why is this? What's this? This hurts,
Totally.
that hurts,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I think, I took away from that, not only like she probably doesn't get touched like that
Mhm.
either very
Mhm.
often,
Yeah. Mhm.
um, and it just, and it also made me more aware of like where in my life am I allowing people, you know, where can I feel safe enough to be vulnerable enough to allow somebody to,
Mhm.
you know, give me kind healing hands, I guess is the right is the
Oh,
like I don't know how
I
to
love
say it because I'm
that.
not being like I just want people to touch me all the time
No,
because I
no.
don't, but
It's
like
that tenderness. It's the
yes,
tenderness, it's the gentleness, the nurture, right? And I think that we can only really experience that if we are in this safe place within
mhm,
ourselves, right? If
right,
we can only be vulnerable and receive that tenderness if we're feeling at ease, if we're feeling
right,
safe enough.
right,
Yeah,
right.
I love that. So you were doing the deep healing in your therapy sessions, but then outside of therapy, you started to um, do some breath work and some mindfulness and Reiki. Was there
Hmm.
anything else that you tried outside of those things?
Well, I think, I'm a very good student slash patient. And so, and this is often hard, and this is one of the places that I feel like I help people the most is to actually go practice the boundary setting. Like you
Mhm.
talk about it in therapy, like, oh, I need
Yeah.
to set this boundary. And then you go out and it's like, but then it gets weird, it gets awkward, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was literally just practicing whatever the small or big boundary was. And that took so much time
Mhm.
because we went from no boundaries
Mhm.
to then like establishing this one boundary.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm still my mom's caregiver and do need to be attentive. And sometimes you do show up in the middle of the night and run her to, call 911, like that stuff still happens. And so, there was a lot of that. I will say, there were so many times where I did have to ask my husband, like, can you come help me be grounded?
Mhm.
Like I needed him, and of course he's way not into like
The
he's a business
woo-woo.
and like very practical. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know you're not going to understand this, but I'm, really struggling. My heart is on fire.
Yeah.
My stomach is turning in knots. I'm usually I was crying by this point, and I'm like, I just need you to ground me in this moment.
Mhm.
And he was like, well, how do I do that? And I'm like, just come over here and hug me. He's like, so you need a hug. And I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. But also, so I would have to ask for support
Mhm.
to help me sit through that uncomfortable of like, I mean, because there's always this back and forth with like, it's just going over to turn off a light. It's only going to take you 5 minutes. But it's like, but if you go over now, then this is, you're setting a precedent, and then it's
Right.
like the OCD kicks in and you're blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, I need to be home with my family.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the desire and the need for me to be connected with my husband and children was more powerful than the desire to make my mom happy all the time.
Yeah. Right.
And I had to learn that caregiving wasn't always about making her happy. Sometimes what she needed was not going to make her happy.
Right.
And it was those little times of saying, no, I'm not going to come over every night or, whatever, like
Mhm.
little things here and there that when the time came where literally she had been in the hospital 38 times in 5 years, she had been on a ventilator in the ICU, she was now completely bedbound,
Mhm.
and she was still trying to figure out how to get home.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the physical therapists are talking to me, the case managers are talking to me,
Mhm.
and they're like, she still has the right to leave. And they're like, and I'm like, are you kidding me? But
Yeah.
it's true because she has no cognitive decline. And so I was able to go in there and have a conversation with her.
Mhm.
The very conversation that I had been told since I was a little girl would be the one that killed her. I was able to go in there and have empathy and have compassion and
Mhm.
have confidence in my own body and my own job as a caregiver for her and her daughter because I had already done the work with those little saying no's and saying maybes and saying not nows and shifting and getting more support where we needed it and where she needed it and being more honest with her. And I was able to say, Mom, I know how this, I know this is very difficult and I cannot imagine what you're going through right now, but I can just tell you, I cannot take care of you if you go home.
Mhm.
If you stay here, this is how we're all going to take care of you.
Mhm.
And I was able, and then she was able, she wasn't thrilled about it. She wasn't like yippity doo-dah, let's do this, but she was like, I understand. I
Yeah.
understand this. And
Wow.
so, um, but the linchpin was me. Because
Mhm.
if I had just been like, well, she told me I can't leave her here, so I got to get her home, and she just get like, I don't know, we'll figure, I I just knew that wouldn't keep her safe.
Yeah. Right.
And
Wow.
so the it was the little practices and the
Exactly.
little day, and I mean the breathing doesn't sound like a big thing, the mindfulness doesn't sound like a big thing, but I'm here to tell you right now, it is what helped me not get into that spiral
Yeah.
that sometimes our brains want to do,
Mhm.
where we're second guessing every single thing, we're playing out all of the what ifs.
Mhm. Right.
Um, and sometimes my mom was telling me the what if,
Right.
like, if you don't do this and the house catches on fire and I'm not able to get out of here, I'm going to die. Like, like it was always like,
Totally.
and
Totally.
so I had to learn how to feel guilty and still do the thing that I knew was the right thing to do.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I did that through breath work and
Mhm.
mindfulness. I also did a lot of what I learned. I had never really done like somatic yoga or somatic work in other than like I did yoga, but like I didn't do it like, oh, I am doing this as a, it was more like a workout for me, like I'm going to do the things to stretch my limbs. And then I started getting more as I started working with the breathing and the mindfulness, I started to practice more of that with my yoga practice. So
Mhm.
when the instructor would talk about a certain movement and they would talk and they had been saying this all the time. I just wasn't listening. It's like, okay. But they were actually talking about, where are you feeling this? What are, all this kind of stuff. But then another thing I noticed is your body, when I was practicing mindfulness and I would get into my position, at one time I recorded myself just to, I think it was an exercise for my therapist or something. And when I watched it back, I was without any consciousness of my own, I was moving
Mhm.
and what I learned about that is my body was, it was tending to me. It
Yeah.
was allowing the feeling, the emotions to move through me in a way that I wasn't even able to figure out what those emotions were, but they were able to move through my body. And so now, like whenever I do a mindfulness practice, that doesn't happen every time, but sometimes it does. And now I can kind of feel it. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm getting some stuff out,
I
like this
love
is
that. Totally.
and so for me, literally, those were the two biggest things.
I love that.
Um,
As long as we just bring more intentional awareness to it, right? If
yeah.
we just like give it the time and space that it needs.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing for me is the awareness of
Yeah.
not only like my situation, but then
Mhm.
also the awareness of my own body.
Mhm.
Um, and then from there, developing that compassion.
Yeah.
Um, for myself. And, that was another thing as I was going on my own trauma healing journey with the EMDR, I began to see where my mom's trauma had such a big impact on her.
Yeah.
And of course that almost like backslid me a little bit because I was
Mhm.
like, oh, she can't help it. It's trauma,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, I had to learn to care for my mom without shouldering, carrying her trauma.
Yes.
And that was another great place for boundaries
Mhm.
that looked more like a country picket fence than a big concrete wall.
I love that. I love that, Jeanette. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I'm so curious to know who Jeanette is today. How would you describe this version of yourself?
Well, I still get tired and
Everyone does.
I still get stressed out, but um I don't ascribe shame to any of that. And I've learned that when you're in a stressful situation, it is normal for your body and your mind to feel stress. So
Mhm.
therefore, just, allowing myself to listen. So my biggest self-care, so I had for decades, I've been a fitness instructor. I've done, I teach Pilates for 10 years, like all this kind of stuff. So at 4 o'clock every morning for 20 years, I'm up, I'm out, I'm running, I'm doing Pilates, what a, and so that was, and everyone's like, oh, you're doing you're so, and I'm like, yes, I know, I'm awesome. And what I really learned was, you know, that self-care, that while I had a great routine, was not serving me.
Mhm.
Not always, but there was a lot of those years where it was not serving me. It was just burning me out more. And so one of the things that I do now, the Jeanette now still gets up early, but I also ask myself, like, what do you need? What do you need to do this morning? Like
Yes.
what will serve you better? Is it, sleeping in a little bit longer or going on a short walk and then doing some restorative yoga? Like I take a few minutes to be present in my body when I wake up instead of being half a mile down the road by the time my body wakes up, like
Yes.
like
Uh-huh.
running with it. Um,
Love that.
and so, but another thing is I'm willing to tell my son, like, hey, this is your summer before you go to college. Let's do a trip. And that was something that was really interesting. I really wanted to do a trip with him. Well, of course, in the middle of the summer, like the beginning of the summer, my mom goes in the hospital. She's in the hospital, she's having emergency surgery. It's a big old mess. And my husband calls. He says, what do you need? I said, I just want to be able to go take our son. I want to go somewhere with our son
Mhm.
this summer. And by the time I got home that night, he had sat my son down and he had said, it's really important for your mom to spend time with you before you go to college this summer. What is one thing that you want to do? And they had bought the tickets, uh, rented, got in the hotel rooms. I had everything set up by the time I got home that night. So I
Wow.
didn't, and then I was going to go on that trip no matter what. And sure enough,
Mhm.
when I went on the trip, I got a phone call. I was out of town.
Mm.
And it was like, instead of worrying about whether or not I should come back or what, I was like, you know what? Let me talk to this person. Let me talk to this person. Okay. And I was able to enjoy the time with my son.
Yeah.
And then, then in the fall, he was like, are we going to do our normal trip to the mountains like we do every fall? And I'm like, you absolutely. And so I'm able to just be more present in my
Mhm.
family.
Mhm.
And because my husband is still really busy, I'm still really busy, but we're way more um, intentional and present when we do have that time together. So both of our
Totally.
kids are now in college.
Yeah.
And so we don't get a lot of time with them, but when they're here, we want to be able to be present. Now, sometimes their social calendars are full, but we're letting them know we're available for them,
1000%. Oh my gosh.
So
I love
that's the
that.
biggest thing for
Yeah.
me is I'm not constantly second guessing
Yeah.
when I'm with my family, should I be with my mom? When I'm with my mom, should I be with my family? Like I'm not doing that. That
Yeah.
was probably the most exhausting thing was never feeling like I was doing the right thing at any time.
Totally.
So the Jeanette today is way more confident in whatever she happens to be doing at this
Oh my gosh, I
time.
love that. I love it. Thank you so much, Jeanette, for sharing all of this with us and walking us through your journey. I really appreciate you just opening up and being willing to tell us a little bit about what you've experienced. Tell the audience what you've got going on and how people can connect with you.
So first of all, please come hang out with me on Instagram. I am always over there. I'm at the Self-Caregiver. I share my journey as a caregiver. I also talk a lot about how caregivers can take time for themselves without feeling guilty, even if they're the only one that's doing the caregiving. Because a lot of people are like me, I'm an only child, like there's no one else. Like,
Mhm.
how do we do this? And I would also encourage, I did want to say this one thing, a lot of people may be listening and like, well, I'm not a caregiver yet. And I hear you. But Rosalind Carter, the former First Lady, made one of her most famous quotes is that everyone is a caregiver, will be a caregiver, has been a caregiver, or will need a caregiver at some point. So the earlier you kind of get a handle on your own emotional intelligence and your own presence in your body, the better. So, of course, I know the work you do, Tatiana, is very helpful in that. But I also I have a workshop right now, and it's for caregivers. So it's called 3 Ways to Stop Feeling Like a Trapped Caregiver.
Mm.
And if you're like, well, I'm not a caregiver, but you don't want to be trapped, if you don't want to be stuck in that, like, or if you already know, like, ooh, my relationship with my parents is already kind of eh. Uh, I don't, when it is time to take care of them, I want to make sure I have boundaries. This is a great workshop to come to because we talk about, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, how like you don't know you're a caregiver until you're already like neck deep in it. And it's because you just add stuff to your to-do list. Well, one of the first things I talk about is that to-do list and how to make sure you're organizing it in a way that keeps you safe.
Mm-hmm.
That is the number one thing that I want every person that works with me as a caregiver to know is my priority is you and
Mm-hmm.
keeping you safe, financially, emotionally, physically, all of those things. And making sure that you're being well tended to. So I have that workshop. I'll give you the link to it. It's the
Yes.
selfcaregiver.com/workshop, but I'll give you the link. And then of course, anybody can come find me on Instagram. And I'm always talking about stuff like that over there too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeanette. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you absolutely loved this episode, I would so appreciate it if you subscribed and left a review on Apple Podcast, or take a screenshot and share this episode on social media. Don't forget to tag me at tatiana.holistic.coach. The more nervous systems we reach, the more generational cycles we break, and the more we contribute to a kinder and safer world. And if you're looking for somatic healing services, send me a DM and I'd love to chat on how I can support you. I'll see you in the next episode.